Perfect. So first and foremost, I just want to introduce our speaker, David Valente. He is a researcher at Nord University, and he's also a communications director for Early Language Research Association. But before I dive into that, I think I forgot to introduce myself just because there's so many familiar faces like Sunny, Bianca. I even worked with David in Norway. So I'm just going to take a quick moment to re-backtrack. So my name is Stephanie Malik Pilon, and I'm studying to be an English teacher. My major is teaching English first language, and my minor is teaching English second language. So moving on to our speaker today, David, he's a PhD researcher at Nord University. He's doing many things. He's also working for the Clare Journal, so that's pretty interesting. It's children's literature in English language education. He's a reviews editor. Additionally, he's a communications director for Early Language Research Association. And this webinar is based on the ICEPELL project. So what ICEPELL means would be intercultural citizenship in elementary English education. Today, we're kind of going to look at why picture books could be a tool to foster and promote empathy. And the overall aim of the webinar, I'll let David later talk more about that, is to kind of provide a blueprint for pre-service teachers to co-create picture book-based materials as ICOP. So I'm really interested where this goes because I know in Norway with David, we were talking about verse novels and how to use that to promote empathy. So I'm kind of interested on hearing more about his take for picture books. And the presentation is going to be about 30 minutes. During this presentation, please write your questions in the chat and we'll go back to them at the end. We kind of ask everyone to kindly keep their mics off during the presentation. This meeting will be recorded, so if you feel uncomfortable being filmed, you can feel free to turn your cameras off and on, but we really love to see everyone's faces and smiles and reactions, so if you feel comfortable doing so, please keep it on. And the REEAL project aims overall to generate new ideas, promote new ways of thinking, and it's really a tool for pre-service teachers. So I think that it's a project that's been going on for a while now, and I'm super happy to step back into it. And with that being said, unless anyone has anything to comment, I think I'm going to hand it over to David.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie, for that welcome. Thank you to Sunny and all of the team for inviting me today. And thank you to all of you for coming, and to anyone who's watching online. I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as it is here, wherever you might be. Okay, so I'm going to explore in this session today picture books, particularly in elementary English education. So for my context, elementary is looking at children from age 5 up until age 12, and I know in different contexts around the world that age range can vary. I'm looking at the potential really of picture books to promote both empathy and social justice action taking. As Stephanie said, I am linked to Nord University in Norway, and currently since January I've been at the Norwegian Study Centre at the University of York in the UK. Okay, so in this webinar, these are the areas that I'm going to explore. And as Stephanie said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project, the ICEPELL project. Intercultural citizenship education through picture books in early English language learning. And I'm going to draw on the insights from that project to think about how elementary English language teaching can incorporate both intercultural learning and citizenship education. I'm going to be using the acronym a lot in this session, ICE, so Intercultural Citizenship Education, the bringing together of these various domains which are becoming more and more prominent in elementary curricula throughout the world. And I'm going to be using, as Stephanie said, the tool, or as I like to call it, the vehicle of picture books for achieving these wider educational goals within the context of English language learning and teaching. I'm going to think about how picture books can be used by teachers to prompt or catalyse empathy and social justice actions, thinking about the school environment, but also beyond the school environment, beyond the classroom walls. And I'm going to give you a little opportunity to brainstorm potential intercultural citizenship educational themes based on a picture book trailer. And then I'm going to share some sample activities from the project that have been trialled in classrooms in 5 different countries in Europe. But I think very much that these materials can be used all over the world with various adaptations. Okay, so quite a lot to get through today. Okay, so a little bit about the ICEPELL project. Well, the website's there, and essentially, in terms of outcomes, because the project has officially finished, but it certainly feels like a project that refuses to finish, because we're continuing on, the materials are being used, as I said, and teachers are making them their own, they're adapting them, they're experimenting with them around the world. But very much it was a materials creation project by teachers for teachers using picture books. It was the 3-year project funded by Erasmus+, and it involved the following 5 countries. Norway, which is where I have been based for 4 years until very recently, Portugal, Germany, Italy and the Netherlands. It involved 60 people in this project, and those 60 people were student teachers, in-service teachers and also teacher educators. And the aim was to help teachers because, as I mentioned earlier, intercultural learning and citizenship education are becoming more prominent in curricula, including in English curricula around the world. So the challenge is, how do we integrate these huge, wider educational goals with children who are learning English as another language, as an additional language? And as I said, crossing that age range of 5 to 12. So that's just a little bit of an overview about the project. So I'm going to first of all unpack citizenship education, which I think is often more concrete, and then I'm going to move on to intercultural learning. So I'm taking this definition of citizenship education from the European Commission, looking at democratic societies and participation within those societies. So actively participating, being informed, being responsible, and this idea of the connecting the local, the regional, the national and the international. So what can people do? What can children do? What can schools do? What can societies do to address concerns in their local context with wider concerns in the regional context, with even wider concerns in the national context and at the international level. So the aspirations are obviously huge, and it's how do we make these aspirations accessible then? And what tools, what vehicles can we use for these huge goals to become concrete for children in the English language learning classroom? So Council of Europe categorises citizenship education according to knowledge, skills, attitudes and values. And this gives a little bit more precision for when we're thinking about materials design, when we're thinking about lesson design. So interaction with others, with diverse others, I should say, others who are potentially different in some way. That's both inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. And obviously, this interaction links very much to language education, using language to interact effectively and constructively with others. Critical thinking, of course, which is now becoming more and more prominent in language education, social responsibility and acting democratically. And I think, we can all agree that, these are things the world desperately needs at the moment. Okay, so those are the the ways that I am conceptualizing citizenship education today. So thinking about that conceptualization, just going back there, the knowledge, the skills, the values, and the attitudes. What about in your context? So I just want you to think whether you're in the Canada context or elsewhere joining today, and for those of you who are watching the recording online, what about citizenship education in your teaching context? Is it separate subject, as it is in some countries, such as in Portugal, for example? Citizenship education stands as a subject in its own right. Is it integrated across the curriculum throughout many different subjects? Is it an important part of English teaching in your context, or none of the above? So I'd just like you to type in the chat box, and Stephanie to tell me what people are typing. Are they typing A's, B's, C's, or D's, or a mixture?
Perfect. Monica Waterhouse says B in Quebec.
Interesting.
Christia Lynn from U Laval says B as well.
Okay.
And we have Amy Richardson who says A. Isabelle Boutin says B from Quebec. And we got some people typing.
Can often link as well as to whether teachers are generalists or specialists, as in, are they teaching English or are they teaching across the primary curriculum, including English? So
Yes.
as they do in Norway, for example.
We have a bit more comments. We have Marie Chantal Gagnon who says A in Quebec. And we have Malaji who says A in India.
Okay.
And then some other comments include from Amy Richardson. The new Culture and Citizenship in Quebec program was recently published, and then in brackets replaces ethics and religion. Okay. And then an unknown user below that says not included in English.
Right. So thank you, Stephanie. So with those, contexts vary as they did on our project. We had 5 different countries and the curricula differed. So it can vary as to how then you approach the teaching, whether you're going to approach it as in an integral part of English or linking it to your other school subjects. And as you can imagine, there are pros and cons to these different approaches. And what I'm suggesting today in the webinar is that through these materials, they lend themselves to a multitude of context, whether you are an English specialist, whether you are a generalist teacher, whether you have citizenship as a distinct area of the curriculum, and so on. So these materials are versatile, they're flexible, and can be used and adapted for multiple different contexts. And if you are a teacher or a student teacher going into practicum wanting to bring these areas into your teaching, they do provide a rich resource. Okay. So I'm going to move on now to the intercultural learning, which is perhaps more complex, more contested, and sometimes a little bit harder to pin down. I'm drawing on principally Michael Byram's work today as a seminal contributor to the area of intercultural learning in language education, thinking about his early work in 1997 and his most recent work in 2021. And particularly the prominence in 2021 of critical cultural awareness. So this whole idea of critical thinking links very well to this. And it's thinking critically, not just in a general sense, but in the sense of what's happening in the world. So critical thinking, looking at global issues, so that linking of the local, the regional, the national, and the international, and then doing something about it, which for children learning another language isn't always straightforward, as you can imagine. So what's involved in this critical cultural awareness? Well, I'd say pedagogically, it's the action-orientated lens. So where the learning doesn't just remain inside the classroom. So, for example, if I think about my early English teaching over the years in different countries, we'd bring real issues into the classroom, we'd look at real content, we'd look at what was going on in the world, and we'd make a poster. And we put the poster on the wall, which was, tangible, gave us a clear outcome, and it was child friendly. But was it actually doing anything in terms of real action? And so we're very much thinking, and it's not easy, but we're thinking about how we could spark empathy to prompt potential action taking that goes outside of the classroom into the school community, and potentially, depending on the children, the teacher, the school, the parents, families, and the wider community, that could go into the community, thinking about the local community, but also potentially the international community. And that's where we get this idea of an international community of practice. And we're going to look at that in a little while. The second main area of critical cultural awareness, thinks about the political domain. And again, thinking about my own teaching experience over 2 decades in English language education, the heavy tendency, particularly in published materials such as course books, is to keep the politics out and to be particularly apolitical, particularly in the context of teaching children English. Whereas from a critical cultural awareness perspective, we're wanting to very much bring the political in. But what do we mean by the political? Well, it's to do with learner motivation, so that learners make a proactive contribution. And there we have the quote from UNESCO, thinking about justice, peace, tolerance, inclusion, security, and sustainability. So this active global citizen. Okay, so those are the 2 main contributions, I think, from Byram's theory of critical cultural awareness. So how then, in a pedagogical sense, are we going to weave this all together? How are we going to bring the citizenship education and the critical intercultural awareness together? How are we going to marry that? And that was what the ICEPELL project set out to do in a concrete way. So let's just have a look at these circles then. So looking at the circle on the left, context 1, we are fusing, if you like, language education, so we have our language objectives, with critical cultural awareness and with citizenship education in the classroom context through the vehicle of the book. And in our project, it was the picture book. So we were working on these 3 interrelated objectives through the vehicle of the picture book. That was potentially Norway. And then context number 2 was doing the same thing, Portugal, Germany, the Netherlands. Now, these would just happen to be the countries that participated in this project, but these could have been any countries, which has these objectives in the curriculum, which, as many of you were saying earlier, you certainly seem to have in Quebec. So 2 different contexts working on the same picture book, with the same pedagogical materials, and then the sharing. So it's definitely going beyond the classroom, it's going beyond the country, it's going beyond those national borders. And the virtual tool that we used in this project was a European tool called eTwinning. I don't think that matters. It could be Teams, it could be Zoom, it could be any tool that you use in your educational environment. The point is that there's this sharing across borders. So in our project, teachers were sharing pedagogical materials across borders, but also the children were sharing their action-taking projects across borders. And in that way, it was connecting the local with the regional, with the national, and with the international. So hopefully in that graphic, you can see how this was all happening. And there weren't just 2 contexts, there were actually 5, but could have been 10, could have been 20 if we'd had, this was a 3-year project, but if it was 5 years or something, could have been many contexts, not only in Europe, of course. And just to show you how this was coming together, you'll notice the circles are different colours. And these different colours are to represent the different contexts. So the influences were coming in from classroom contexts that the children were exchanging from. So hopefully that is a visual representation of what was quite a complex project. And just to give you that essence of how we approached this challenge. Okay, and as I said, we did it through the vehicle of Picturebooks. And these are the 18, I think, in the end, 18 picture books that were used in the ICEPELL project. And there you see the front covers of the pedagogical materials that the teachers created. So, and you see from that diagram, the goals in these pedagogical materials included using these picture books for learning English, using these picture books for cultural exploration, and using these picture books for action taking. So bringing together the language objectives with the cultural, or we should say intercultural objectives, and the citizenship education objectives conceived as action taking. And so these 3 areas were very interwoven within each of these what we called ICE kits. So intercultural citizenship education kits or teaching packs. And if I just look at the covers there of those picture books, and so some of the themes, we've got environmental action, we've got Indigenous rights, we've got bullying, exclusion, refugee experiences, war, kindness, difference, fear, and I mean, so many. So the reason I've included this is just to show you the sheer range, the potential of the picture books for bringing in these very challenging global issues and making them accessible for children even as young as 5. And in some picture books, such as Welcome, which is the orange one at the end there, that actually fuses the climate crisis with the refugee crisis. So, you know, in something so child-friendly and so accessible and so visual, we're really working on some very powerful global and local national issues. So the potential for that we discovered through our project for picture books was huge. Okay, but I don't want to be all utopian today and say, you know, grab a picture book and all will be well, because I think that would be a bit naive and a little bit silly. And so I just want to share a quick anecdote about this, a bit of a cautionary tale, really. So I was observing a lesson, not in any of those 5 countries, in a different context, where a very experienced English teacher was using picture books with the theme of war. And one of the activities that the teacher developed was, imagine war broke out in your country and you had to leave suddenly. You had to leave quickly. You didn't have time. It was dangerous. And you needed to take various objects. What would you take? What would you put in your backpack? So if we think about the backpack activity, it's personalized, it's age accessible, it's relatable, it's child friendly. And one child, I think the children are about 9, and so one boy, he said in beautiful English, a chocolate milkshake. Now, the teacher was quite surprised by this rather divergent response and a little bit taken aback. And so again, the teacher mediated and used the child's home language to really establish this concept of fleeing because of war and danger and not having any time, and what essential items would you bring, would you take with you? And then the boy said, a pair of dirty socks. So the reason I'm sharing this cautionary tale is that, the only person, in terms of empathy development, the only person's empathy that you can control is obviously your own. So we can't think it's a linear process. We bring in the book, we share the story, the children are going to do some creative tasks and activities, and therefore they will want to go out and protest and save the forests and the oceans and whoever. It's about the potential, and it's also about giving a range of activities, a range of tasks, and working deeply with the content, with the material, so that the potential for empathy, the potential for social justice action taking is enhanced, but obviously cannot be guaranteed, because people are people and people will empathise with some things and not with others. In terms of capturing, fostering this potential, I want to share with you some principles from Janice Bland's work that she's conceived as deep reading for in-depth learning. Because if we want to enhance that empathy, we want to increase that potential, it's about our own pedagogical approach to working with picture books or any children's literature in the classroom. Some key principles I wanted to share with you briefly are that when we're working with a picture book or any children's literature, the participation of the children needs to be active, so that it's not simply they are passively listening to or having the teacher tell them the story, but they contribute through their responses, through their interpretations to the story. So that the way we share books in the language classroom is active and enables children's responses. Also, that when we are trying to help children connect to the protagonist, to the main character's experiences, that these connections are both mentally but also bodily. So there's an embodied response, the idea of literature as doing, as feeling. So connecting in terms of our questioning, in terms of our involvement, getting the children to join in story, getting the children to act out story. So all of those responses help to simulate the experience and potentially increase empathy. Janice Bland talks about sensory anchoring, that language and meaning, if they are in harmony, and the language and the meaning from the language is working together, then children respond in a multisensory way. They respond through sight, through sound, so that it's this whole child learning, that they are actively engaged, they're involved, they're joining in, they're singing, they are responding in a multifaceted way when sharing picture books. And this obviously links to the follow-up activities and tasks that are done after sharing the story, as well as during the story. Talk around the text is very important, that questions are open, that it's not just a culture of right answerism, yes, no, true, false, right and wrong, that there are many interpretations for both the verbal text but also the visuals, and really working with the visuals to encourage children to interpret. And so by having them contribute to the story and then connect the story to real world experiences, their own and others' real world experiences, the potential for empathy and the potential for social justice action taking is enhanced. Not guaranteed, but enhanced. Okay, so I want to make all of that very concrete now, and I'm going to share one of my favourite picture books from the project, We Are Water Protectors. Some of you might have worked with this one, you might know it, you might have used it. I'm going to show you very, very short book trailer for We Are Water Protectors, and I've got a couple of questions for you while you watch this trailer. The first one is, how does the picture book design contribute to the visual narrative? So how does the design of this book help children follow the narrative visually, follow the story? And second one, as you watch, think about how could you use We Are Water Protectors to bring English language learning, but also intercultural citizenship education together? So how could you use this book to bring those three domains together? Hopefully you can hear it. Can you hear that?
No, David, you might need to stop the sharing and then share again, but there is a little box for sound that you need to check.
Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you mind just repeating the second question?
Second question is, how could you use this book for those three objectives, the language, intercultural learning, and citizenship education? Can you hear?
Yes.
We are water protectors.
Okay, so that was very short, just to give you the an overview there. So, Stephanie, I'd like you just to collect some ideas from the participants. So, what about that visual narrative? So, how does the design from what you saw in that trailer, or for those of you who know this picture book, how does the design of the book support the visual narrative, support the story?
Amy Richardson mentions that it flows like water.
Exactly.
And Wendy mentions the circle motif helps students to see connections within the story.
Yes, that's certainly, I mean, this is the dust jacket. Can you see that?
A little bit. It's a bit blurred on the side, but you can, if you zoom the book in, we do see the motion lines that you're referring to.
So you can see how the dust jacket shows this continuous, the water. So the water is emphasized throughout. Anything else you notice from the dust jacket or from the hardback version here? What can you see here?
I think that there was someone who wanted to speak. I believe Elizabeth Kennedy.
Hi, I was just going to share the everyone holding hands. So we are talking about the collective as protectors together. So we're really seeing that shared there.
Yeah. So absolutely. So you've got the water going on, and actually this is picked up throughout the visual narrative, including in so the protagonist is a girl, and the water motif is picked up in her hair, as you can see here. So the importance of the water is life, going on throughout the book. As you mentioned, Elizabeth, the holding of the hands, the solidarity, and the standing up, standing together and protesting, key themes, and all of these visual anchors give children an opportunity to use English, but also to make those very important character and plot related predictions. And this is what goes back to Bland's idea of contributing to story. So they've made all of these predictions, and then while we're sharing the picture book, we can draw on those predictions. So it's not just coming from the teacher. Absolutely. And also the circle of life there, linking to a lot of the beliefs of the people depicted in the visual narrative. I mean, it's very, very rich. Just very quickly, because I know we don't have much time, what about those objectives of intercultural learning and citizenship education? Any thoughts on those from the clip that you've seen?
We have a few comments, David, circling to question 1, and I think some people are typing now, but I know that Wendy was mentioning, as you just mentioned, that the circle motif does help students see connections within the story. And then Monica did point out that Monica found it interesting that the main character is holding a feather. And adding on to that, Amy Richardson mentioned that the impression of unity, community, as long as the visual layouts.
Absolutely. And so you as a group are obviously very familiar with reading visuals. And not all teachers are. And I see many lessons where picture books are used that we skip that, we skip the next, we skip the next, and on we go. And actually, we've just very quickly, I know, but we've brainstormed the use of that dust jacket, the use of the front and back covers. We could go on to the end papers, the title page, the dedication, all of those paratextual features that often in language education get missed or quickly brushed over, are full of potential for meaning making. And in all of these materials, there is a strong focus on working with those paratextual features in the classroom to really involve children in story and get them contributing to story. What about question 2? Anybody have any ideas for question 2?
Let's look at that. We do have some more comments. People need to gather and work for it to work, by Isabel. And Sunny mentioned, the merging of people and water and how humans and the environment are interdependent, which I do think it really ties into ICE if we look at that interculturality. And additionally mentioned that the story helps students to rethink their responsibility towards protecting water and the environment. So, sort of more conscious. And we have about 4 more comments.
I think that's fine to get us going. So certainly, that responsibility towards protecting water, so that connections to the children's own worlds and lives, certainly. In terms of interculturality, those of you who are familiar with this picture book, what was the story inspired by? Does anybody know?
I think Wendy made a good point with the Indigenous context and perspective to consider. And I think that's something that we can't forget about.
So this book was, the end papers give a lot of contextual information from both the author and the illustrator. And if you remember the Standing Rock protests against the Dakota pipeline, that is very much what the book was, what gave birth to the book, really. And so that is, Indigenous rights to water and so on, very important part of this story. And then also linking to that, the local context of all of us needing to protect and save water. Okay, So moving on, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted to show you, because the power for me is very much in the visuals, as with all good picture books. So you see the protagonist with her grandmother, the importance of water in the indigenous teaching, and this comes throughout the book. You see many different groups coming together there to protest collectively, and we see a lot of potential there for, protest slogans, signs, messages. So in that double spread alone, we're seeing the potential for language development, the potential for interculturality, and for citizenship education. And now I want to come on to the classroom context. So what did the teachers who trialled this picture book and developed materials around it, what did they do? Well, these photographs are children who are about 10 years old in Portugal. And so they did, which will be much more familiar to people at this webinar attending today, but wasn't so familiar for the children in Portugal. They had to do a little bit of mini research around Indigenous groups around the world in different continents and different regions, and then different groups focused on different parts of the world. They had some mini research questions. They went off in groups, did their research, came back and shared. And so you can see them there sharing the different findings, which I thought was quite nice to show the collective and the very learner-centered potential of materials with picture books. So that was just a little glimpse into some of the activities that you can find in these particular materials. And thinking about the idea that, the Portugal context with the Norway context, for example, came together and shared. And that's the last thing I'd like to share with you now, is this whole cycle that we used. And as I said at the beginning, we, in our project, used the tool eTwinning, but this could be done on any virtual platform that your school uses, that is child safe and age relevant. So we developed a cycle for action taking following 6 main steps. And I'm going to share the activities with you that the teachers developed for We Are Water Protectors to make these steps very clear and concrete. So the first one then, for discover, I'm sure you can think of many action-taking cycles that you could develop linked to this picture book. This is just one example, and that's what I mean about the potential to adapt these materials. So what they are, in essence, is a blueprint or a flexible framework that you can take away, you can make your own as relevant to the students that you are working with. But in this particular context, they, in terms of making the global issue local, they started by brainstorming ways to save water. And the teacher shared the outcome that they were to co-create a dual language flyer. So Portuguese English, Italian English, German English, Norwegian English, French English, Japanese English, whichever. Now, you might think, why a dual language flyer? That's what they decided to do. These are not my ideas, these are their ideas. So they wanted something tangible to inform the community about how to save water. Could have been an infographic, could have been an oral presentation. They chose a flyer. And then they had a video call in the share stage with the children in the other countries to exchange ideas for the flyers. And then the teachers emphasise, we want realistic solutions, real things that people can do to save water. And then they agreed what they put in the flyer. So that whole creative writing and drafting process. So what are we going to put in our flyer? And then in our local communities, where are we going to share? When are we going to share our flyers? With who? And how are we going to share them? And this project happened during COVID. So the who and the how was more complex than it might seem now. And then in terms of taking action, it was about, again, remembering going beyond the classroom walls, getting these flyers out into the communities, and then getting some feedback from the communities. So here are our ideas for you. Which ones are you going to do? Which ones do you pledge to do? So a little bit of engagement, because the whole idea of intercultural learning is that interaction through language. And you might be wondering, what language were they using? That's an interesting question for the Take Action. They were often using a range of languages. The taking action didn't have to be in English. A lot of this co-creation work was in both languages, and then to connect with the local community, they were often not using English. And then they shared their final designs. So the designs they used in their context, they shared with the class in the other context on a video call, and they shared what the community, in English, they shared what the community said they pledged to do for saving water. And then the final part of this cycle, which again is the part that often gets forgotten or when time is short, missed out, is the reflection. So reflecting on our actions. What did we do in this project with the other school and with our class and with our community? What did we learn? That's an important question. What did we learn from this project? How did we do it? Thinking about that we could do it again. We could do this cycle again with another picture book for another topic, for another issue. And most importantly for me is what is next. And this is this idea that the children can then maybe take action on a more individual level with their families outside of the classroom. So this, for me, I think the e-twinning part's not important whatsoever. The tool is not important. The technology you use doesn't matter as long as it's safe. The point is that they go through this scaffolded, cyclical process, and that they, do have these opportunities to share with different contexts, to co-create material with different contexts, and also to take action. Okay, so just to wrap this up then before questions. Taking action as an ICOP, as I call it, or International Community of Practice, involves the following things. So if we create materials for learning English with the goals of intercultural citizenship education, what we are trying to do with these things: engage children in meaningful action, help children become proactive in terms of justice, peace, tolerance, inclusion, security and sustainability. And I know it's a very aspirational goal, but I do think these materials help us move towards the aspiration, potentially improve the community or the communities in the different contexts in which they live. One of the teachers who was involved in the project, I thought I'd share this quick reflection from Sonia. She said the main takeaway is the formula. I think she means the framework there, to connect creativity, affectivity and cognition. I think she means there the head, the heart and the hands. The power of a story involved a great number of students, teachers, parents and the community. I feel my mission has been accomplished. I must go on trying to move groups to change the world. I want and I need to try and keep making the difference. I always want to be an inspiring teacher. I thought that was quite a powerful and passionate reflection there. So you have some takeaways. All of these materials are freely downloadable. The link is there. From the ICEPELL project website. As I say, there are 18 kits, and the idea is by looking at these materials trialing these materials in your own classrooms, you then can choose your own picture book as relevant to the age and the learning aims for your lessons. And then using those frameworks, such as the 6-stage cycle, the deep reading approaches, you can create your own materials around picture books for ICE. And to help you do that, there's also a freely downloadable guide, a very accessible step-by-step handbook that you can download also from the website. My final message then is actually from Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Those are the references. And now I think we've got a little bit of time for questions. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much for your talk today, David. We'll leave the floor for questions. I felt like I was back in Norway with a lot of the things you were saying in the framework, so thank you. Believe Bianca has a question. She wants to.
Yes. So thank you for your talk. I think it's really important for young students to learn about the big issues that we have in our world, and oftentimes teachers or other individuals say, "Oh, they're too young." Do you have any hints of how you start? Like, do you just bring the picture book, or should you prepare your students first for the conversations that they're about to have? And how would you do that?
I think that's a really good question, and it's that whole idea of going in cold. Just like when starting to share the book, they miss out the covers, they miss out the title pages, they miss out the peritext and straight in. And I think before we get to the book, we need to do a lot of reading activities in terms of setting the context, engaging children and activating their curiosity. So for each of these 18 picture books, you have suggestions, choices and options for the teacher. One of them more physical, if you want the children moving around the classroom. And I think in water protectors in this kit, I think they're doing a does it float or sink experiment, and why is it polluted, to get the idea of, does everyone have access to clean water? Why not? Who might be stopping that? So a very hands-on activity. And then another activity that's less kind of equipment heavy, and it might be watching a clip. But for each of the sets of materials, you have these context setting activities so that the schemata is activated, and if the children don't know much about the topic, that they get some topic knowledge before going in, that the English is activated, they discuss, and then we move to the book. So I think that's a really, really good question, because it's a little bit like teaching grammar, and you start with the grammar. And we know that's not going to work with children, and I think it's the same when it comes to these challenging topics. We need to scaffold and guide and lead. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
I think if you look at the materials and then see how the teachers have suggested that they did it in their classes, and think, okay, would that work with my practicum in my school, or what would I do something different? Yeah.
I believe Wendy had a question, and that looks really nice where you are, Wendy. Looks nice and sunny.
It is. I'm on vacation, but I just wanted to just kind of bring up the subject, because I think in water protectors in particular, there's and it is with many issues, right? There's other sides, right? Like the pipeline is presented as evil, but we need oil too, right? And so I think that, like you mentioned before, that critical aspect, right? Like having students be critical thinkers as well. So I think we sometimes have to be careful when we're working with children, particularly because they very much often see things as black and white, that we don't push one kind of angle without raising the counter arguments or other perspectives. so that, again, we're not brainwashing in a sense, or that we're careful with that. That's just kind of what I would say.
Yes, and I think that's such an important point, Wendy, and that's where the whole reading against the text idea comes in very nicely. And the idea of there not being one right answer and one interpretation. So, the snake, this very powerful snake image, what does it represent for you? Is it the pipeline? Could it be something else? So I think constantly having space in the classroom when sharing visuals for multiple interpretations and bringing up those dilemmas. I think 12-year-olds in Portugal and in Canada and in many countries can discuss those dilemmas. Okay, that, people have the rights to water, and also what about oil, and so on. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, no, very well said. Adding on to that before I think Monica had her hand next, I think that it really reminds me of the workshop that you did in Norway with Nair, and you had all these books and you made us go, David and Nair had presented us a gallery walk, and prior to that gallery walk, we had a bit of information, but then we watched a video with the emotion. So really, I don't know, I think that it's really tricky, like Wendy said, to not push an agenda or not have this prescriptive lens when we're teaching and we're so immersed in it. But nonetheless, it's really, if we find ways to activate that conversation, activate that knowledge, and it's students having the agency rather than us pushing it, I think that's helpful.
Yes, and I think that's a really good point, Stephanie. And with these flyers, it was meant to be the children suggest, then they exchange with children in another class, in another country. And so it's always meant to be these multiple perspectives because, when we were working on these materials, because I chose this book because I mentored this group, so I know it very, very well. And they wanted to go into hotels and supermarkets, and I said, but really, are they going to listen to you in a hotel? So, but it was great they had that passion and they wanted to go into the community. We just needed to think about the practicalities and the realism of it. But they certainly really wanted to get the community saving water.
Thank you. Monica, you had a question?
Yeah, sure. I'm just picking up, I don't know if it's a question or maybe a commentary, but just how wonderful this is. But it occurs to me when Bianca was asking, how do you prepare the students and Thema, I think we have to think about how we prepare ourselves and thinking about our context, which is so important. And I'm reminded of an example. I really appreciate that David shared the cautionary tale of chocolate milkshakes and dirty socks, which is fascinating. I'm dying to know why the child thought those were essential items. But anyway, children have their own logic. But I remember very specifically an incident, well, it's probably over 10 years ago now, and I had a teacher candidate, a student teacher who was very hot on free trade products and did lessons around this message and maybe tended too far to that prescriptive side, not recognizing that her school context had low-income families. And she ended up with this kid going home, giving his mom a hard time about buying Walmart coffee when they ought to be buying the 3 times more expensive local brûlerie fair trade coffee. And the mother was just like, I'm lucky I can even buy coffee this month. Get off my case, kid. So it became this whole thing. And I think that was a moment where the teacher hadn't really thought hard about her worldview and what's possible for her, and then maybe what's possible for the families of her children. So it was really an interesting, for me, it was a big teachable moment too. So I just wanted to share that in terms of prepping our students and really thinking hard about how we're going to work with these social justice issues.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your presentation. It's wonderful. And these resources, oh my goodness, thank you.
Yes, amazing stuff. I think they had something she wanted to add.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, thank you so much. This is, I think, the second time I heard about the ICEPEL project, and I just couldn't get enough of it because it's just amazing, and it get me so excited about projects like this. And I echo what Monica said about that cautionary tale. I think that is just so wonderful how we have to prepare ourselves. What does empathy look like, right? We have to check in always, and be reflective in our teaching. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I think this is the first time I heard about the bilingual project, which I think it's such a great idea. I think because in Quebec, the context is very different. Earlier you mentioned about the citizenship, because we have a new program, this citizenship and culture program in Quebec, and it is separated from language. Oh well, I have to say, in the francophone system, it is not attached to ESL, and so a lot of times, right? You mentioned about how teachers stay away from so-called political topics, but if we link the languages together, it becomes more meaningful to help students to take action that reflects their language used in the community. So it's not like English is isolated, but English can be used with French in order to do something meaningful that can impact the community. So yeah, thank you for that, because I think our student teachers need to see that like there are possibilities. It doesn't have to be just focused on grammar, but they can get students to do some work, and those work can be utilizing all the languages that they can see in the community.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if anyone has any other questions, but I think this is time, if I'm correct.
I think so. We're 2 minutes over. Well, thank you so much, David, again for the sharing and such a wonderful, inspiring project.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for coming. And if anyone uses or adapts the ICEPEL materials, we'd love to hear, how you used them, adapted them in your context, and how the children responded, and what kind of projects you did. We'd really love to hear that. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.